Good afternoon, Web, and I would like you to meet virtual reality, the new exciting topic in the tech industry. But before that, let me maybe introduce myself. So my full name is Dominique Hazael-Massieux, which I hear is used in advanced French pronunciation tests. As a result, most people just call me Dom, and I work for WCC, so my full email address is dom@wc.org. You can also find me both on GitHub and Twitter as Don't Call Me Dom. And that's reasonable. I mean, when you talk about WCC Dom, people tell you how awkward it is, how painful it is, and so on. So I don't want to be too closely associated with the Dom. So as I mentioned, I work for WCC, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. It is a standardization body that was funded by Tim Berners-Lee some 20 years ago. And the idea behind the consortium was that it's all good and great to have the web, but if we have the Netscape web, if we have the Internet Explorer web, we don't have one web that everyone can use, everyone can rely on, everyone can build on. And the mission of WCC has always been, and still is, to get all these people that build the web together and to get to agreement as to where the web needs to go. It's not always easy. A former colleague of mine qualified our job as technical diplomacy, like the United Nations for browser vendors and the IT industry in general. But it's a lot of fun, and we get to experiment with new technology, look at new trends, and make sure that the platform evolves to cater for new use cases. I've personally been involved in some specific topics. So in general, I've been doing development for as long as I've been in WCC. I like to keep my hands dirty into the very nice APIs that we deliver. I've also been involved for quite a long time in trying to make the web good enough or really good on mobile. And I think we've made progress. It's been 10 long years from my perspective. As part of that, I've also been involved in the development of a number of device APIs, all these JavaScript APIs that you can use to get access to your geolocation, the orientation of the device, various sensors that are available, especially on mobile devices. More recently, I've been in charge of the work on WebRTC. So can you raise your hand if you know what WebRTC is? So that's a good half of the room. So WebRTC stands for Web Real-Time Communication, and it's a set of APIs that lets you build things like Skype in the browser. So no longer you have to have $20 million with you if you want to build a real-time audio-video communication. With WebRTC, you can put that in your web application as a complement to your web application, and suddenly it's live with audio-video chat. It's been quite exciting, quite a bit of work as well. More recently, I've started to look at virtual reality, and that's the reason I'm here with you today. And I will very soon start also a DevRel effort in WCC on which I'll be looking for your input and feedback. But part of the reason I've been looking at virtual reality recently is that, as I was telling you, it's been a long way to get us from, you can actually look at your website on a mobile device to the current situation where we now have these progressive web apps you've heard about so much during the past 2 days, which I think are bringing the web where it needs to be for mobile. It's no longer that the web is an okay situation, an okay solution for mobile. It is the case now with progressive web apps that the web actually brings new use cases to life, brings new opportunities for developers to life, and even solve issues that native apps have not been able to solve in terms of user engagement. And the reason I'm looking at virtual reality today is I think virtual reality has good chances to be what mobile was 10 years ago, the next big thing in terms of a platform for creation and for information sharing. So if you look at the past few months, virtual reality has been very high on everyone's mind. taking here one metric, which is the number of TechCrunch articles tagged with VR. And you can see that the past 12 months, there hasn't been a single month without a news item, and there has been a growing trend in that space. And that's one metric, but I think it reflects the excitement that is growing around this new way of communicating, new way of designing interactions. Now, when you think of VR, some of you may have a fairly dystopian view of what VR is for. It may be just the next new way for capitalist overlords to, well, overlord. What are you going to do? Overlords will overlord. But I think virtual reality has more potential than that, and in particular, it's key that we bring a platform for virtual reality that doesn't close VR to proprietary systems, and that instead we make VR a platform where people can create content. So some examples of applications of VR beyond gaming, which most of you probably are already aware of, or even 360 videos, which is basically revisiting entertainment. There are, I think, fairly interesting use cases that VR brings in terms of new services, content, and applications. One of them, which is illustrated here by a demo on the aframe.io website that I'll be talking a bit more about later on, is how you can use VR to make the shopping experience better, more interesting. In this case, it's with clothes, but you could imagine also if you want your furniture to fit well into your existing living room, for instance, having a VR rendering of both the furniture and the living room would be a great way to get a more real feeling about the overall purchase you're about to make. Another space where I think VR can lead to really interesting experience, it's about learning, documenting everything about understanding how the world works. So in this case, I'm loading from Sketchfab, which is a 3D model sharing platform, the model of a heart, a human heart. And you can imagine that if you're studying the anatomy of the human being, being able to get a better grasp, a better feeling about what the actual organ looks like, in this case a heart, will improve your ability to learn. Another really interesting experience, at least to me, has been what the New York Times has been doing in this space. So they have this NYT VR application where they turn some reporting into actual VR experience. So instead of reading what may be sometimes dry words about situations around the world, you get to actually experience it firsthand. So in this case, it's a news report on the Syrian war. They had one on refugees, so that was quite amazing, if somewhat depressing. But I think that illustrates one of the capabilities that virtual reality is bringing. It's a new way of expressing ourselves, a new way of sharing experiences, and making this experience much more immersive and much closer to the actual feeling that you get when you're in the actual space. I read recently that there have been several experiments in the healthcare space where you use VR as well to make patients feel either more connected or distracted from their pain and so on. So in general, of course, VR will be used for gaming and for pure entertainment, but I think it also has a real potential in terms of bringing new use cases, new possibilities to the world. And of course, if we want this space of creativity to be open to anyone, we need an open platform for that, and you won't be surprised to hear me advocate that the web is the right platform for this. But it's not just that the web needs to be in VR because VR is exciting. I think the web is also going to solve interesting issues that virtual reality itself is facing. So let's say we say VR has been exciting for the past 12 months. This is a subset of the VR headsets that have come to the market in the meantime. And each of these headsets will have their own characteristics, their own resolution, their own processing power. Some of them will be connected to PCs. Some of them will be connected to mobile devices. Some of them will be new independent devices. And well, imagine having to create content that adapt to each and every of those devices. Well, that's something we as web developers know how to do. We know the techniques of progressive enhancement, the techniques of creating adaptive content. And I think that's one of the reasons why the web is such an interesting platform for virtual reality. We have this huge diversity of devices, and it's only the beginning. And so the capability of the web to adapt to this diversity will be important. But another thing with VR is, when you put your headset on, it's a very divisive experience. You're no longer with people, you're separating yourself with the rest of the world. And so there are cases where you'll say, I'll put 1 hour aside and I do a full VR 1 hour session, at least if you don't get seasickness. But that's pretty limiting in terms of the experience that the user will be looking at. Typically, I'm looking at a website with, say, house rentals, and I want to get a better idea of what the house looks like. Having the possibility of upgrading my experience to VR rather than having started in VR space to be looking for houses around, I think it's a great progressive experience, the same way we've seen that progressive web apps bring this progressive engagement to user. I think the web can play the same role for VR. Instead of being, I'm going to do VR the next hour, it is, I'm looking around for a new house, and I can put my headset on once I've identified a few interesting candidates. Another thing the web was built for is shareability. If you're going to build VR content, but it's only going to be available on 1 or 2 proprietary platforms, that's certainly not as exciting as building VR content and sharing it by just one link over your preferred social network. So the intrinsic capability of the web of sharing content is, I think, something that VR can also benefit a lot from. And in general, and obviously I am biased, but I think any platform where we invest to create content, to create experience, to create services ought to be open. I'm not naive. There will always be proprietary platforms, and they will always bring stuff that an open platform such as the web will struggle to provide. But as a society, I think if we do believe that this technology space in which we are working matters, we need to make sure that the values that the system in which we build these technologies align with the value of the society we want to build. And I think we can only do that in an open platform. If we do that in a proprietary platform, then we basically leave the choice to other people, not to ourselves. So, assuming, maybe optimistically, that you agree with me that the web ought to be a VR platform, a platform for virtual reality, what do we need to make it so? So obviously, if you're going to do virtual reality stuff, one of the basic bricks you'll need is 3D. And I hope nobody will be surprised that we nowadays have pretty good support for 3D capabilities with WebGL. So with WebGL, you can pretty much do anything you could do with any other 3D API. More recently, more excitingly, and also probably less mature and deployed, Mozilla started some work a few years ago around an API called WebVR. That API has now been implemented both in Firefox, in Chrome, in Samsung Internet. Microsoft announced last Friday that they were looking at implementing it as well. So it's a young API, but with a lot of momentum. And what that API basically does is it lets you take graphics and project them sufficiently well so that they can be read in a stereoscopic headset. Another thing you need for a virtual reality experience is the ability to navigate the virtual space. And to that end, there is another API that has been developed, the Gamepad API. It was initially developed for regular 2D or 3D games, but it's finding new usage in the VR space. And now if you take these three technologies together and you go about writing a few hundred lines of JavaScript, well, you'll get there, you'll get something. But you know what? WebGL has been around for a number of years. I don't think I've ever managed to write any single line of WebGL that I could understand. And even though VR and the Gamepad API are not nearly as bad as WebGL in that regard, it's still a lot of work. And another great project that Mozilla has been pushing along with WebVR is called A-Frame. So A-Frame is a set of web components that basically encapsulate all the difficulties that you would have with things like WebGL, WebVR, Gamepad, putting them all together. And it puts them into a few set of very simple markup tags. So web components, as you may know, allows you to encapsulate a lot of JavaScript into more declarative elements. And in this case, the elements are of the form A dash whatever you want. So here, with just a few lines of markup, you get to build a scene with this red sphere plane that you can actually navigate through with your VR headset. You also get for free the integration of moving from regular 3D mode to the VR headset mode. So A-Frame basically does all the hard work for you and makes it very easy to get started in VR. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be doing everything with A-Frame. Maybe at some point you'll want to go deeper and dive into the nitty-gritty details of the underlying APIs. But to get started, to get a feeling about what doing VR on the web looks like, I think it's a really fantastic project to be looking at. So beyond graphics and navigation, you'll also want specialized audio. It's particularly important to create really compelling VR experience to have the matching audio. The good news is that the Web Audio API, which we had a great demo yesterday night, the Web Audio API also has support for spatialization, so we at least have the building blocks for that aspect. Another thing that is just starting but is also quite interesting is the capability for web browsers to interact with 3D camera. So things like the Kinect that lets you get, in addition of the simple video stream, get an understanding of the depth field of the video that you're getting from. So we actually have an API for that. We also have an API that actually lets you do some processing on these depth streams. This is all very early days. It's not actually widely deployed at all, and it's still very experimental and moving. And in general, we already know that if you're going to do analysis of 3D streams or video streams in general, you will want to have better access to computer vision algorithms and optimizations. So that's things that we will be looking at, but we haven't done so. The reason you want to have access to these 3D cameras is, well, one use case is you're putting your headset on and you don't want to hit that podium as you're moving around. Being able to detect your environment, being able to detect the real world around you is also important, even in a virtual reality setting. But there is more. So you can already view 360 degrees video in the browser, and A-Frame makes that particularly easy, but there are still more integration points in terms of how you pan around in a video and so on that we need to look at. Once you start having VR in the browser, once you start having WebRTC, I was talking about earlier, the capability of streaming your video feed from your camera in your browser. If you put the two together, being able to have shared virtual reality experience starts to become quite interesting. One person in one room, another person thousands of kilometers away sharing a common virtual reality experience. But to do that, we need the right protocols, the right APIs to enable this kind of real-time streaming for virtual reality. Virtual reality is also a big consumer of high-performance computing. So we know we will need even better performances. As you probably know, JavaScript has made a huge progress over the past few years in terms of how good it is compared to native languages. But there is still more that can be done. There is this project called WebAssembly, which is looking at providing a bytecode binary language for the web, and which is promising to get us even more performances and even less gap with a pure native language. And probably somewhat longer term, but another topic that I find particularly appealing, and in particular for the web, is augmented reality. So virtual reality, everything you look at is made up. Augmented reality, you superimpose on a real video feed, real live video feed, additional information. And I think that's a great evolution for the web. The web is built to bring us information when we need it, where we need it. And having the possibility to do that on an augmented reality setting, I think, will likely be very exciting. I think neither the AR headsets nor the underlying technologies are quite there yet, but at least it's personally a topic I'll be following closely in the upcoming years. So what to take out of this? I guess my main message is, I think VR is a really interesting space to explore, to play with, to try new things with. It's almost completely blank space in terms of user interactions. We don't really understand yet what is the right way to get the user involved, engage, how to make them do what we want them to do, but it's not too soon to get started. And in particular, A-Frame that I was mentioning earlier that you can find on aframe.io, it comes with fantastic tutorials, documentation, so it's really, really easy to get started. So I would certainly strongly encourage you to look at A-Frame, get started, get a cheap cardboard headset if you don't have a headset with you yet. If you're more involved in the VR space, if you want to help push it forward for the web VR specification I was alluding to is being developed in a WebRTC community group, so it's open to anyone to join and to contribute. You can send issues and give us feedback on the API. And I'm organizing next month in California what we call a WebRTC workshop, which is essentially an open meeting for all the practitioners of VR and web technologies to come together and try to build a roadmap of what we already have, what we will need soon in terms of making the web a real platform for VR. So if you match that description, if you already do VR and web, please take note of that event. And the registration deadline is end of next week, so do get in touch sooner rather than later. But I guess I'd like to conclude this by a more general invitation to all of you to understand that although WebRTC might be this weird, complicated thing you've never quite figured out, and I've been there for 15 years and I'm still at that stage, I think it's really critically important that we get more developers involved in our work. I mean, you know that all the web APIs out there are great and fantastic, and you would never change anything to them. But I think some of them could have been improved had we received more feedback earlier in the development process. And all the work we do in WebRTC nowadays is done on GitHub. So if you want to comment on a spec, you just have to file an issue on GitHub, and you just have to give us the reason why you think that spec is broken and why it could be improved to make it easier for you guys to work on. And that's true of VR, but that's true of CSS, that's true of any of the JavaScript APIs that you might have been working on. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll soon be starting this DevRel effort in WebRTC. And a big part of what I hope to achieve under that role is getting more input from developers into the standardization process. And I know it's probably hard, it's probably difficult to figure it out, to even justify spending time on it. But I guess my plea here is if you can help me understand what would make it easier for you to get involved so that we get the feedback earlier, so that you get better APIs, that'd be terrific. So do get in touch, dom@wc.org. Don't call me Dom on GitHub. And so please help me, help you, help us, help you. Thank you very much.